Hello everybody, welcome to this Skyrim video. Today I am excited to bring you the first video in a series of videos that are going to cover the combat in Skyrim. So basically I'm going to go through the weapon types, starting with daggers, ending with warhammers, and explaining how their speed and damage and ranges work. Even though this is pretty standard and basic, you will probably learn a thing or two, so yeah, let's get right into it. So the dagger is the quickest one-handed weapon. It's not really a weapon you would think about using in combat that much. A decent strategy that you can use with the dagger is that you can couple it with a shield and use your shield in kind of like an offensive way as well. Since the dagger is so fast, you can bring up your shield right afterwards. Another purpose for the dagger is to dual wield with it. You want to put it in your left hand, and this is going to make your right hand weapon much faster. A good combination for this is, for example, a dagger and a mace. This will have the same swing speed as a dagger and a sword, but the mace does more damage and it does more stagger potential. So for this combination in particular, the dagger is really good. Next up we have the sword. This is one of the most popular weapon types in Skyrim. The sword has the fastest swing speed out of the three type of weapons that you're most likely to be using: sword, axes, and maces. It keeps you a little bit more mobile when you're running around the battlefield, but it has the least amount of damage and the lowest stagger potential. The axe is somewhere in between. I would still say that out of these three weapons, I would recommend the mace. In second place, I would recommend the axe, and lastly, I would recommend the sword. Unless you happen to find a weapon that has a very good enchantment, then the order may change a little bit. Pretty much everything that I said about the sword still goes for the axe, except that it does a little bit more damage and it has a little bit more stagger. Now, the mace is kind of the one I would recommend that you use just because of that stagger potential. If you can get used to the mace, it is really good. And so, yeah, these weapons types are not very complex as maybe some of the two-handed weapons are, as far as how much stuff they do. All of these weapons, though, however, have a little nifty thing. Right after you do a power attack, you can follow that up with two fast attacks right after, which is really good because there's no drawback to doing this in combat. So that's something you might want to use. Next up, we have the two-handed weapons. Starting off with the sword, and actually I'm going to talk about the sword and the axe at the same time, the two-handed sword and the two-handed axe, because these two are pretty much the same, but one is just superior. So if you happen to compare a great sword to a great axe, when every other factor is exactly the same, you always want to use the great axe. These two weapons have the exact same swing speed, exact same range, but the axe does more damage and it does more stagger. So under normal circumstances, it's better to use a great axe than it is to use a great sword. It's pretty much that simple. However, swords are more common in Skyrim, so if you do happen to come across a sword with a very good enchantment, then you might want to switch it out just for the damage sake. Finally, the warhammer. This one is, of course, the most stagger and the most damage. Now, actually, I would make a little bit of an argument and say that this weapon is a little bit too difficult to use for most people. When you're fighting in Skyrim, a lot of the time, you do have to fight multiple enemies at once. And I don't feel like the stagger and extra damage of the warhammer really makes up for the slow swing speed that you're gonna have to deal with when fighting multiple enemies. This is a very advanced kind of weapon, and unless you get one of those enchanted warhammers that like Volendrung or the long hammer that pretty much swing like a sword but have the stagger potential of a warhammer, I would actually try my best not to use a warhammer. Again, there are exceptions if you find something that is really strong in comparison to the other weapon types. So yeah, now that we've gone over the basics of the weapon, I would like to touch on hotkeys for a moment. Hotkeys is probably one of the two most important things that you will have to master if you want to become better at fighting in this game. If you're playing on PlayStation or Xbox, you have hotkeys by holding left and right on your D-pad. I recommend that you hotkey your weapon and your healing spell, ideally, since this is most likely where you're going to be switching between the most, and it's going to make you more fluid in combat. Now, onto a little trick that I would like to show you. You can actually cancel your power attacks, your normal attacks, as well as gain your mobility quickly right after you power attack. This is more efficient to do with heavier weapons, so the two-handed weapons in particular, but it can technically be done with the one-handed weapons as well. By switching away from your weapon using a hotkey, your character will regain mobility again. This is so useful when you, for example, misjudge a power attack, or there were too many enemies in that area in particular, so you just want to get out of there. This is great. If you switch to something like a healing spell as well, you can heal if you've taken any damage. If you made it this far into the video, I would urge you to really look into hotkeys as well as movement. The next video in the series is going to cover movement in Skyrim, and that's That, along with hotkeys, are probably the two most important things that you can do to improve your Skyrim gameplay by far, more than armor and weapons and anything, because it's something that you're always using, and it has a very, very large ceiling for skill. So yeah, that was all I had for the basic fighting in Skyrim. We're gonna touch on a couple of other things as well. And in the next video, we're probably gonna do some more example fights against actual enemies. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, like the video if you did, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.